My landlord tried to evict me illegally during the pandemic. I bought the building with my inheritance, and now he's my tenant. I, 35M, never thought I'd end up being a landlord, especially not to the guy who tried to kick me out during one of the toughest periods of my life. But life has a way of throwing unexpected curveballs, and sometimes those curveballs lead to the sweetest kind of justice. Let me take you back to early 2020. I had been living in my apartment for 7 years, consistently paying rent on time and keeping the place in pristine condition. It was a modest 2-bedroom unit in a 6-unit building, nothing fancy, but it was home. I worked as a restaurant manager at an upscale place downtown, making decent money and even managing to save a bit each month. When the pandemic hit, everything changed overnight. The restaurant industry collapsed, and I, along with millions of others, found myself unemployed. I immediately started cutting expenses and looking for other work. I picked up delivery gigs, applied for unemployment, and used my savings carefully. I wasn't worried at first. I had always been responsible with money and had enough saved to cover a few months. My landlord, however, had other ideas. 2 months into the pandemic, he started showing up unannounced, pounding on my door at random hours. He'd demand to know when I'd pay the rent, even though I had explained multiple times about the eviction moratorium and showed him proof that I was actively seeking work and applying for assistance programs. "I don't care about any government moratorium," he'd yell through the door. "This is my building, and I need my money." The harassment started small, but escalated quickly. First, it was just the angry visits and threatening texts. Then mysterious maintenance issues started occurring, but only in my unit. The hot water would disappear for days. The electricity would cut out randomly. Each time, he'd claim it was an unavoidable problem, but somehow, no other units were affected. One particularly memorable incident occurred in August. I came home from a delivery shift to find my apartment door completely removed, just gone, with a hastily scribbled note saying it needed urgent repairs. I called the police that time, and they made him reinstall the door immediately. The officer gave me his card and advised me to document everything. I started keeping detailed records, photos, videos, text messages, police reports. I didn't know it then, but this documentation would prove invaluable later. Then, in October, my mom passed away suddenly from COVID complications. It hit me like a ton of bricks. We'd always been incredibly close, talking almost daily. The fact that I couldn't even be with her in her final moments, it broke something inside me. I fell into a deep depression, barely able to function. But amid this darkness came an unexpected ray of light. Mom had left me an inheritance. She'd always been smart with money, investing carefully over the years. It wasn't millions, but it was substantial, enough to potentially change my situation. Around this same time, I overheard an interesting conversation between my neighbor and their visitor. They were discussing how our landlord was actually in serious financial trouble. He'd over-leveraged himself with multiple properties just before the pandemic, and now he was falling behind on mortgage payments. The building was at risk of foreclosure, which explained his increasingly desperate behavior. This information sparked an idea. I contacted a real estate lawyer and explained my situation. After reviewing my documentation of the harassment and the building's financial details, she helped me formulate a plan. We discovered the building's actual market value was significantly less than what my landlord had paid for it. With my inheritance and a small loan, I could potentially buy it. But we had to be strategic. My lawyer helped me set up an LLC, and we made an offer through a third party. The genius part? We used my landlord's own harassment against him. The documented pattern of illegal behavior could have led to serious legal consequences for him, which would have further complicated his financial troubles. When we presented the offer, it was structured in a way that emphasized the clean exit it provided him. He was underwater on the mortgage, facing potential legal issues, and desperate for a solution. The offer wasn't lowball, it was fair market value, but it was significantly less than what he'd paid. He accepted within days. The closing day was one I'll never forget. Everything had been handled through lawyers and agents up until then. But for the final signing, I showed up in person. The look on his face when he realized who had bought his building, it was priceless. He turned pale, then red, then tried to back out of the deal. But it was too late. All the paperwork was in order, everything was legal and binding. He had signed the preliminary agreements, and backing out would have cost him more than he could afford to pay. Here's where the story takes an interesting turn. I had originally planned to give him notice to vacate his unit. He lived in one of the apartments. But then I realized something. Keeping him as a tenant would be a much better lesson in karma. So I kept all the existing tenants, including him. I hired a professional property management company to handle day-to-day operations, ensuring everything would be done properly and legally. The first order of business was addressing the years of neglected maintenance. When he tried to move out, despite having 6 months left on his lease, I reminded him of his own strict lease enforcement policies. The exact policies he had used against tenants for years were now applying to him. Living in the same building as my former landlord has been an interesting experience. He tried to play nice at first, then tried intimidation, then went through a phase of filing constant complaints about minor issues. I addressed each complaint promptly and professionally, documenting everything just like he had taught me to do through his own bad example. The property management company has been worth every penny. They handle all tenant interactions professionally and equally. When his faucet really did need fixing, it was repaired within 24 hours, the same standard we keep for all units. When he's late with rent, he receives the same formal notice as any other tenant would. About 6 months into the new arrangement, something unexpected happened. The property manager forwarded me an email from him, requesting a meeting. Against my lawyer's advice, I agreed to meet in a neutral location, a coffee shop down the street. He looked different, humbled somehow. He told me about how losing the building had forced him to confront some hard truths about himself. He had over-leveraged himself trying to build a real estate empire, treating people as numbers on a spreadsheet rather than human beings. The pandemic had exposed the flaws in his approach, but instead of adapting, he had doubled down on aggressive tactics. I thought being tough meant being ruthless, he said, staring into his coffee. I forgot that my tenants were people too, dealing with the same pandemic I was. I listened, but didn't offer absolution. Actions speak louder than words, and I needed to see sustained change before I could truly believe in his transformation. Over the next year, an interesting dynamic developed. He became one of the most reliable tenants in the building. Rent always on time, keeps his unit in good condition, even started helping elderly neighbors with their groceries. The other tenants, who initially were wary of him remaining in the building, have gradually accepted his presence. Last month marked 2 years since I bought the building. In that time, I've learned more about property management and human nature than I ever expected. The building now operates at a modest profit, which I've used to further improve the property and keep rents stable despite market pressures to raise them. I still work in the restaurant industry. In fact, I used some of the inheritance to buy into partnership at my old restaurant when it reopened. The building provides supplemental income, but more importantly, it's taught me valuable lessons about power and responsibility. Sometimes people ask if I feel guilty about essentially taking advantage of my former landlord's financial troubles. I don't. I paid fair market value for the building, and everything was done legally. His own actions, both his pre-pandemic financial decisions and his illegal harassment during the pandemic, created his situation. I just provided a solution that worked out in my favor. The biggest lesson I've learned from all this is that karma doesn't always require active revenge. Sometimes the best revenge is simply doing things right, being the kind of person or landlord you wish you'd had when you were on the other side. Last week, something happened that prompted me to share this story. I was doing my monthly property walkthrough with the management company when we passed my former landlord in the hallway. Instead of the usual awkward nod, he stopped and handed me an envelope. Inside was a formal letter of apology for his behavior during the pandemic, along with a thank you note for being a fair landlord despite their history. It was unexpected and, honestly, unnecessary. I had made peace with the past long ago, but it was a reminder that sometimes the best way to teach someone a lesson is to show them a better way. For anyone wondering about the legalities, yes, everything was done by the book. I had a lawyer throughout the process, and all transactions were properly documented and executed. The irony is that my former landlord's illegal eviction attempts during the pandemic actually provided the leverage that made the purchase possible. His documented pattern of harassment could have led to significant legal consequences, which made our fair market offer more attractive. The building isn't huge, just 6 units in a mid-sized city. I'm not trying to build a real estate empire. My goal is simply to provide decent, well-maintained housing at fair prices. The property management company handles most day-to-day operations, allowing me to focus on my restaurant work while ensuring the building is run professionally. Looking back, I never imagined myself on this side of the landlord-tenant relationship. But life has a way of putting us exactly where we need to be to learn important lessons. Sometimes those lessons come with a side of poetic justice. Edit. Wow, this blew up overnight. Thanks for all the awards and messages. To address some common questions. 1. Yes, this was all legal. Everything was done through proper channels with legal representation. 2. No, I'm not some real estate mogul now. It's one small building, and I focus on maintaining it well rather than maximizing profits. 3. The property management company handles most interactions with tenants, including my former landlord, to keep things professional and avoid personal conflicts. 4. I didn't do this for revenge. I did it because it was a good business opportunity that happened to have a karma bonus. Edit 2. Some people have asked about the other tenants' reactions. Most were relieved to have a responsive, professional landlord. A few were initially worried about changes, but the improved maintenance and stable rents have won them over. As for my former landlord, he's actually become one of the better tenants in the building. Sometimes people really do learn from their mistakes.